resume recording, so then we don't have to think. So welcome to the, whatever this call will be. It's the collaborative culture slash onboarding call. So I think the question, okay, so Eric, what was the topic question that you wanted to talk about?
Well, my suggestion was we could ask folks, and even though I was ranting about a call to action, I failed. So let me see. I think the thing was I was just gonna ask folks. Oh boy, I lost my page. Like what are they doing to build community at this time in wherever they are? Let's see. How are you encouraging collaboration in your community? And context of COVID-19 and all that kind of stuff. And I've got some examples I can play around with, but that was my suggestion.
So I know in the last, and then Dia, you said, around COVID-19 is definitely something where you noticed, whether or not it was just shifting or whatnot. So I'm really curious. So first of all, how are you?
Doing well. It's a busy week this week, but exciting stuff happening in our community, so it's good.
Good. And have you seen the collaboration come more together or harder since COVID?
It's been interesting, and I'll be curious to know about what you guys have been experiencing. But in the beginning, it seemed to be more like a lot of positive collaboration, and especially within like the business community and things like that. But then I see a lot of conflict regarding, just a lot of like whether it's public health or it's political things. They're just coming in between, which I think is a barrier to collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
But overall, I think it's better. It's changed a little bit, but I definitely am seeing some of those conflicts a little bit now.
All right, I'm just moving my car. Go ahead, keep talking. So Eric, what about you? Are you seeing better or worse collaboration?
I think the thing that I'm not gonna put it, sort of like two different hats. So because the stuff, and I'm not sure how much you're aware, how much have you shared about the Forward City stuff, but basically one of the key parts of that is that there's a thesis that has an ecosystem builder as an important role. One of the other legs of however many legs there are on the stool is that there's like a local council that is engaged in helping define the work and helping develop the work. So we don't do anything without collaboration. It's just there's no starting point if folks have not agreed to do something. And what I think I see across different communities is, to what level do they want to work on something big? Do they want to work on something small? So within the Forward Cities realm, I'd say in general, the folks who have already gravitated towards this and they know that it's a collaborative thing, they've been good. The thing that I've seen locally is that the kinds of collaboration that I typically would have been involved with in the past, I see some silver linings. I see a couple places that are doing great stuff, and we're tapped into one of those in the Santa Fe area, but I'm really disappointed by the lack of collaboration I've seen in the Albuquerque area. And there's probably like 4 of us or 5 of us who typically do something, and right now it's like, not my job. City's not picking up it, so I'd say it's a mixed bag. Let me put it differently, and this probably feeds into the Forward Cities thesis or the ESHIP thesis, which we're attempting to prove, is cases like this often need somebody who has that specific role of bringing people together and making the collaboration happen. And if no one owns that, in a case of like a crisis or something else, sometimes that just falls off.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. So I'm seeing a couple of different things too. We talked about the way that communities that are tighter knit, that have better more fleshed out ecosystems, they they reacted to COVID stronger, right? So there were ways that foundations and economic development and policymakers all kind of catalyzed quickly and catalyzed more impactfully because they were already connected. The communities where they had to go and find each other first or didn't have the relationships
Mhm.
had a much slower time, obviously. The interesting part has come as we also went one more step and we included the race issue, right? So when Black Lives Matters and the protests and all of that came about, it also shifted because then it wasn't just about small business or corporations or economic
Mhm.
development. It was about particular kinds of, um, or particular sectors or representation, and and then that response also got to be a little bit more of a shift. So it was really interesting to see um, how first the approach to COVID was one thing, and then when you layer in a different kind of crisis, it was also another thing. Hello, Hassan.
Hey,
So
Sue. Hi,
um,
everyone.
so this is a pseudo collaborative culture call. So we're talking about collaborative culture and the way that we've seen people communities respond post COVID, like pre COVID, post COVID, all that kind of stuff. But now what I'm also bringing in, like with the Black Lives Matter stuff, how that adds another layer of complexity on top of um, what's already been an interesting way that people collaborate. So and then we talk about the ecosystem building versus the ecosystem building and how that comes into play. And I think, Eric, it seems like what I'm hearing from Albuquerque, and it might not be so, but what I'm hearing is um, because you don't necessarily have a person who has taken on the role, whether or not it's defined or not. I mean, what you filled in that Albuquerque role was you work for the city and you were an ecosystem builder. And I'm thinking more and more, like we talked about the field of ecosystem building or the professional field of who you are. I start to tend to think that it's a skill up as opposed to a defined title. Like this is a job role, you are an ecosystem builder? Is it you are a policymaker, educator, whatever, slash you have this added nuanced perspective that you bring into whatever it is you're doing that makes you an ecosystem builder? So Hassan, I'm curious to hear what's going on in Detroit and then the other communities that you're working in, like pre and post COVID. What is what is that what does that collaborative thing look like?
So, I mean, the major thing is that I joined Forward Cities at the beginning of the year, and all of our engagements in all of the communities that we're working in, my role, my role was remote, but throughout the month, part of my work was to be in community um, and uh, facilitating convenings, and all of that has shifted to a virtual space. An interesting thing is one of our newest communities, New Haven, which launched, is in a process. Our kickoff event is launching next month, but that engagement came on board in March. And we had all these plans at the beginning of April, to be in New Haven, visiting, touring neighborhoods, meeting with stakeholders, and all of that shifted to virtual. So
Wow.
this is almost like a test model in that the entire engagement from beginning to end uh, in helping to develop equitable entrepreneur ecosystems is all virtual. Uh, so
So New Haven, Connecticut?
yeah, yep,
Oh.
yeah.
Well, if you need some field work done, I'm not too far away.
Okay. No, I will, now that you've
I
said that, You don't know what you got yourself into.
Well, I mean, I'm in Narragansett, Rhode Island, so I'm within an hour and a half or so of New Haven. So
Yeah. On the Detroit stuff, it's kind of interesting, and I think because the ecosystem in Detroit was pretty well developed prior to COVID, I think the transition was smoother than in some other communities because all of the relationships existed. So it was just a matter of now adding this different layer or different way of doing things to the already existing relationships. Um, Not that it wasn't clunky at first, but I think that's the main difference. I think the transition was a lot smoother because rather than have to develop relationships around, okay, now we want to put together this business relief fund, and you have to, figure out who needs to be part of the conversation, and not all the people that work together. I think in Detroit, all of that already existed. So it was just a matter of deciding, okay, what's needed in the ecosystem. These are all the people that need to be brought in. They all know each other. They have relationships. They've worked together with each other before. So I think it was a lot. So we were able to do a lot, I think, within probably the first month.
you can
In
go
Detroit.
quicker, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, because everything moves at the speed of trust. See,
Exactly.
Dia, I love it when people come on and they just validate all the things that I say.
It was all set up.
I don't know. Obviously Hassan and I have had these conversations before, but I think because it resonates. So what I see, what you do in Ada, right? You went and built those relationships already. So it's not simple by any stretch of the imagination, but it's tangible to people because, and I think that's what we keep saying about this work is I'm not as focused on the outcome. There's a lot of people that are focused on outputs and KPI and all of those things. And my thing is, if we can build it collaborative, if we can cook it into the culture, then you're able to move faster because this will not be the last pandemic. As much as everybody would like to think it is, it's not going to be the last economic crisis. It's not going to be the last anything we'll do together. So if we get the together right, then we can ride the next wave, right? Overcome the next barrier. And we just keep getting better at it because we have more people to do it with and to think about it and to have that momentum. It's Victor, when he was at the foundation, he talked about this. We all keep pushing the flywheel. The idea is to get the flywheel to spin on its own, but we all come around and push it just a little bit, and we're pushing in the same direction. And then I'm tired of pushing, and then somebody comes along and helps push it some more, and then eventually we'll be able to let go because the thing will just. And I think that's a beautiful way to think about what happens at Forward Cities, right? Is that you get this council that just figures out how to tackle the next challenge, and then you don't have to like restructure. Okay, how are we going to approach this? No, we already have this. It's strategic doing. We have these framework in place, and now we're just going to slot in the next challenge, right? Does that resonate?
Yeah.
I'll just say that I've said many of those same words quite a lot over the last week and a half. And the way that I'm actually, and I'm curious about both Dia and Hassan, your perspectives on this, coming in at different points and different levels of familiarity with, say, the Forward Cities piece. But one of the things that in talking to the directors that I work with last week, and really became very intentional over the past maybe 2 or 3 weeks in shifting how we were talking about it. And one of the things that we've been thinking all along, but hadn't necessarily expressed to these folks who are really trying out this ecosystem builder role in different places, is that there are a lot of different ways to be an ecosystem builder. There's lots and lots of different paths. However, what we needed to do, and some of this is kind of me trying to mind read Faye, what we needed to do with Forward Cities was we needed to come up with something of a process and something of a structure that could be replicated and scaled elsewhere. And because of that, this idea of kind of the strong ecosystem builder role plus a council and the different mechanisms around that, that became like, you know, part of the package that we're working on sort of perfecting and, you know, just testing out. I wouldn't say that's necessarily better than somebody who starts an incubator or a co-working space and they ramp it up and they turn it into a real driver in their community. But that's just such a real like onesie and twosie kind of thing. We needed to come up with something we could say, if we want to drop into New Haven or we want to drop in some other city, this is a way we know works and we can guide you through that process.
And I think that also makes it more sustainable, as to what we were talking about earlier, that this is not the last economic crisis, or this is not the last time we all need to work together. So, you know, if it's individuals or even organizations, they may not necessarily be sustainable. And that also, I think we all had a really good conversation. I don't remember which Go call, but about the ecosystem building being more of a skill than the job position or job title, because we need those policymakers or economic developers to hone those skills and not think it's not for them and that they have to be something else to be that linkage in their community. So that's great.
What are you thinking, Hassan?
I was just thinking about what you said about the innovation councils, and I think part of that model that I think that makes it effective is that you have this sort of governing body across the engagement that Forward Cities does in each one of these communities, where rather than Forward Cities coming in with this top-down approach in each one of the communities and saying, okay, this is the model we perfected, this is how it's done, now who needs to implement it on the ground? It's all of these things are brought before the Innovation Council, and the council, which consists of various cross-sector community leaders and stakeholders, are the ones who ultimately make the decision and decide what's best for their community. We're basically bringing, practices to them which are effective and have worked, rather than, reinventing the wheel in every community. But at the end of the day, these are, I guess for lack of a better word, suggestions of what could work, and then the council deliberates and decides exactly how and what they want to do.
Because the pushback is usually, not often, often, but not always. It's like, oh, but our community is unique. And so that's the pushback that you hear. Oh, it doesn't work that way here,
right,
because we are blah, blah, blah. But the structures of a community are similar across the United States, right? You have, if you're talking about a city or a town, you have a mayor, you have educators, you have policymakers, you have funders, so the elements are basically the same. They take different, shapes and sizes, but the pillars, right, are pretty much the same. And then you take the tenets of the values and things, and people will say consistently, like, okay, so we want kids to be educated, we want homes to be safe, we want this and that, and I think those are the commonalities. And then you weave into it the unique nature of the places that you're at and say, okay, so what does it need to look like for you, knowing that these are the goals that we're all shooting for. So we'll see. I think that there's a lot of commonalities, and identifying those commonalities, and that's where your best practices come in, right? Here's what we found to be helpful, or here's what seemed to work in this other community. And they'll go, oh, well, Kansas City isn't like New Haven, so you know what? It's not going to work in New Haven. We have a different mindset and a practice. And then you go, okay, Do you still want your homes to be safe? Do you still want your kids to be educated? Do you want everyone to thrive? And yes. So the answers are, okay, yes, you want those big overarching goals. What is it that we're going to do? And learn from each other. You don't have to do it the same way, but and I think that that's what we're pointing towards with ecosystem building and with the tools that we're looking to showcase. So just a reminder that that there'll be a call for submissions for individuals and organizations and communities to showcase that the things that have worked in their community. So those will be highlighted on the second day of the ESHIP Summit. So that call for submissions should be coming out sometime this week or next, and then we'll have an opportunity so that you can see what's working in different places, right? So, Dia, if you have something that's working in Ada that you're seeing as a possible thing that you can scale or just share, please feel free to do that. And I know that I mean, Eric, I think that Albuquerque working around the food, I mean, the Rio Grande stuff, working around food as a central driver is a really interesting rally cry, right? It's not what people would have thought of initially, or like in Hassan's case, like Detroit has always been thought of as a manufacturing place, but there's so much other stuff that goes on that that Detroit has identified as far as you know, these are the drivers, these are the things that the people in the community kind of identify with. You have a strong food culture in Detroit. People
Yep.
don't know that. My friend Michelle Donaldson, who's over there building up restaurants, you know, I think her project got put on hold because she was building a restaurant at Tiger Stadium. So that was a real bummer because, like, she's a James Beard nominee, so she's got some skills,
Yeah.
and hopefully they'll be able to catalyze that. But yeah, will you do me a favor? And this is
Yes,
kind of an aside. Will you go drop in on my friends at Hot Sam's and see how they're doing?
I will.
This
I
is their
will do that.
99th year in business, and I'm worried about them because they're you know, they're a small business and they've been wanting to get online so that they can be more sustainable.
Yeah, they
Being
did.
on,
I went. They did an event back in January.
uh-huh,
That so I attended that event, and it was well attended. I mean, a lot of
good.
the movers and shakers, and there were political leaders there from municipal government and county government.
Excellent. I was
Yeah,
there, it was a year ago. I was with Hassan in Detroit, a year ago, just about this time. So um, there's amazing things that happen, but I'm glad. Okay, so now that we understand what collaboration's about, how have what are the common stumbling blocks or challenges that you've seen?
I mean, I could say, and this is recent, and I think it was as a result of a lot of the relief efforts in Detroit. I think most of the people who are leading those efforts are people that are in traditional economic development roles. Um, and I think that's what made some of these processes a little clunky because they were the individuals who were leading a lot of the efforts around relief were people that were in municipal government and county government and traditional economic development roles. And I think it's only when ecosystem builders um, got engaged in the process that things smoothed out a little bit. And I think the challenge is that, and we talk about this all the time, is that traditional economic development has, in most cases, hasn't yet seen the value of what we do. Um, but I think actually, as a result of COVID, I think they, here in Detroit anyway, um, see the value a little more.
That's so. What do you think? Is it a territorial thing? Is it because they've got some structures in place, the frameworks and stuff that they have to, um, checks and balances that they've set up in place that make it clunky?
I think
Uh,
there's a whole combination of things. I think there's one is the power dynamic,
mhm.
um, and I think and if you think about traditional economic development in terms of, you know, business attraction and business attraction, not Main Street type business. It's engaging with community hasn't really been part of the uh, the framework of what they do to some
Okay.
extent because it's been, I think, and Eric could probably speak more to this. I think in most cases, they operate with in a level that I think doesn't often touch community until they need to get community buy-in, and then they check the boxes to get community buy-in. But
That's
I think it's just a
interesting.
model. I think it's just a model of how traditional economic development has been done in terms of trying to bring in the big whales, basically. Um,
We see that.
but
We see that a lot. Eric, so speak to this further.
You know, I'll just say that there are some things if we weren't recording, I'd probably be totally transparent. But you know, it's because I mean, as Hassan said, so the power dynamics are really key. And we've already talked about sort of that level of trust. And to me, so I threw in the chat because I don't want to throw Albuquerque under the bus in public. No. So I think that collaboration among ESOs and stuff is not happening as much as I'd like. And that's just, I don't know, sour grapes or whatever. There's some good community building efforts happening. However, since that kind of stuff was not already happening, then I think it's really difficult to work through the power dynamics and building trust and all that other kind of stuff in this environment. Because, someone's going to get some money. And if you haven't worked all that out, it's really tough to do that sort of that next level stuff in this environment. I think it's actually pretty good for community building. And I see around Black Lives Matter and some other topics, I see some good community building, but it's that next level of really working together. I'll just say, what I'll say is we were already working with a group in Santa Fe that really was very collaborative and already had that experience, that trust with each other. So I think the fact that was already in place allowed that community to do very well in responding to this current crisis around food. Similarly, even though we weren't very far along in Long Beach, the nature of the folks that had come together, I'd say more community service organizations that include economic development than economic development organizations. They already knew each other. They were already working with each other in some ways. So the fact that there was that familiarity, I think is allowing us to have some really good conversations and move that forward. But yeah, so I don't know if I'm answering the question. I'll just say I do see that kind of that tier where you can get a certain amount of stuff done with just the nature of the crisis, but to do all that we'd want to do, you need those relationships. And that's tough to build quickly without a plan and without somebody who's shepherding the process.
I think it's interesting, and I want to hear from Dia too, but I think it's because when you're talking about election cycles, right, you're talking about 4-year cycles, 2 to 6 years, but really it's 4-year cycles. And so whatever it is that you have to present on, you have to have delivered within 3 years. It takes you at least 6 months to a year to get set, and 6 months and a year on the back end that you're campaigning. So you've got 2 years to really land that whale. And if you don't land the whale, because that's the big numbers, that makes the titles, that gets you electable, so you get another 2 years worth of work out of it. And economic developers are measured by those KPIs. And so as long as we're measured by those KPIs, as long as that's the deciding factor, then we can't get to collaboration, because collaboration doesn't mean that everybody thrives. Everybody thrives is not as measurable as you bring in a big organization that gets X amount of jobs. The reality of those X amount of jobs, I think, so the unpopular opinion, and since I don't currently work for a big organization, I mean, I'm a consultant, so I get to say kind of what I want, is that when they talk about big companies being job killers, which they're not quite job killers, but they're not quite the job makers that you say they are, right? Because they say, oh, this company ABC is going to come in and they're going to have 1,000 jobs. And we're going to invest X amount of capital into this organization here, right? So they move it to this town in order to do that. Well, the reality is all of that money is not spent in that town. The money that's spent is to support the efforts in that town. That means that that money is maybe hiring 5 people at headquarters, right? So that, because you're bringing the company A, B, and C into a town, doesn't mean that all the jobs are going into that town. Doesn't mean all the funding is going to be spent in that town. That means that the initiative to have that in place equals X amount of jobs and X amount of money. Does that make sense? I think that it's the very fine line when you bring in a company. I don't want to throw Tulsa under the bus. So when you bring in a company and you say, this company will bring in 1,000 new jobs and spend $250,000 in Tulsa. Is every penny of that being spent in Tulsa? Not usually. Most of it is, but the initiative to support moving that entity or growing that entity. When you say, okay, so we're building headquarters, does that mean the engineering firm is from Tulsa? Does that mean that the construction company is from Tulsa? Are all the jobs that fulfill that building, is that all money that's put right back into the community? I can't promise that that's the case. I would love for that to be, but I don't think that's realistic. So I don't know. Dia, what is it that you see as another hurdle or a different nuance of a hurdle?
Well, it's a little similar to the power dynamic issue that Hassan mentioned, but like who takes the lead on making that collaboration happen? Like sometimes even that seems to be an issue, that again, coming back to the invitation, who is the invitation coming from? Like, okay, we want everybody on the table to talk about it, but it seems to be such an important or big deal as to, who's calling a meeting if I'm talking about something tangible. So a way to do that more, I don't know, not the top down kind of experience, I think is very important. So Celia, you're muted.
So how do you get the top people to come if the people at the top are not calling the meeting? They have to have a reason to come, and they have to think that it's in their best interest to come, right? Because they're at the top. So I watched I spent yesterday watching a Noam Chomsky. There was a documentary about the it's almost like the oligarchy of the United States. It's a very small number of people in power, and how that power got distributed. So talking about, and these are things that are baked in. So he points to James Madison, and James Madison, founding father, wrote all of these wonderfully equitable democratic things. But there's a phrase in the Constitution, if I'm not mistaken, according to the documentary, that points to not having too much democracy, because too much democracy would put the power at the masses. And if you put the power at the masses, then the people that have the power lose the power. So it's not necessarily in the best interest of the people who have the power to distribute it, right? So then you don't necessarily want really true democracy, because then you're giving away your power. So that's a very interesting notion. The people who have the power don't necessarily want the power to go away. They like having power. So why is it we're all fighting for equity, and the equity goes against all of those things? So now how do you get the people that have the power and the money to want to share the power and the money? Like, what's in it for them? Is it a feel good? Is that enough?
Well, it also seems like the genuine true leaders are the ones who don't really try to control that power, but have that grassroots support. And the more you let go, it's like, I don't know, you have followers, but they also do it out of because they respect you. But I don't know, that might just be textbook. Sounds good on textbook. I don't know.
Yeah, I totally agree. And the thing I threw in the chat is, it reminds me of, I don't know that we have, it's like maybe 2 or 3 of us we were not the leads at various organizations. And there was a lot of fighting between the top folks at different organizations. And we just like, I liked Webb, who was working with this group, and Deirdre Firth, who later became one of my bosses. She was doing this other thing. And we would just get together for like informal lunches with the kind of make it happen people behind the scenes. Most of it was us, not particularly like, it wasn't about us, wasn't about ego. So I don't remember that was intentional, but later on, when other people retired and moved out or took on a different gig, we were the people in charge. So it was like, oh, well, of course I'm going to work with this guy. She's going to work with me. It just made things kind of easy, but it was really organic.
I think that it's the relationship building, right? And so I was talking to Victor as he's putting together the episode for Right to Start on Tulsa, and reaching out to a bunch of people in Tulsa to try to get this thing catalyzed. And I kept, like, there was varying levels of frustration. Certain people would return my calls or respond to emails in a timely manner, and then others wouldn't. And then, and we talk about this all the time in ecosystem building, right? It always takes somebody from outside the community to shine the halo and say, so for me to go, when I went to Ada and kept telling people what a great job Dia was doing, because she absolutely was, it was more validating and affirming because somebody outside the community actually said that. Not that they didn't actually know it, but they didn't really recognize it, maybe to that extent, right? Or that's the practice. It's like, oh, well, yeah, but they're always here. So Eric, working in Albuquerque, I knew the stuff that Eric was doing because you could see it on a national level and you could see the influence that he had. But people in Albuquerque may not know or dismiss it. So it's usually somebody outside the community that comes in and validate and affirms you. So I was telling Victor, it would frustrate me so that the stuff that I was trying to do didn't have traction sometimes, depending on who I was trying to engage. And then I have to take a step back and say, but at the end of the day, it wasn't about me anyway. So whether or not you paid attention to me, I was trying to push an effort or an initiative that wasn't about raising my status in the community. And so I can't take it personally because everybody else is trying to fight for their square inch of whatever they can hold on to. And it's tough. It's not easy. So being able to do enough of the things to get enough of the attention so you get enough of the people to pay attention to you when you want to do something, and to empower and inspire people to do that. So I think, Dia, when we talk about, for me, leadership isn't about a laundry list of skill of being able to do things, right? It's not. I think what we've done in this age is take the traits that and the skills that we recognize as management and governing, and equate those with leadership. And I don't think that's truly what leadership is. And and so that's where you get the term servant leadership. And I don't like the term, because it feels really weird. Like, servant leadership feels weird to me, right? But I get it. I understand that the idea of not needing to be the person on top is important towards that model. But I think about the people that we think are leaders, and the traits that they have, and the things that they do. And I think that the ones that we hold up have a lot to do with management and governing than they do about leadership. So, who's a leader that you can think of? And what does a leader do? And how do you lead in a collaborative culture where no one's in charge? So what do? We just keep promoting each other.
I mean, so I'll say, I don't know. I feel compelled to fill space. I think there are a lot. So I think there are at least a handful of good examples of that kind of approach. And I think I'd probably point to Portland. I don't know. I like Portland in a lot of different ways. There's several different people who've played key roles, but they're very good about sharing and stuff like that. And I think, to me, that sells the community, but I don't know that you could claim that that would be responsible for, some big thing. So that lack of that big ticket, like Hassan was talking about before, like you recruit Tesla or something else, that's a big win in economic development and everybody loves it. Those efforts often, it seems like they require somebody to take the lead. So that I think you have a different kind of win from a collaborative process that may and probably is more sustainable and better. But if I'm the director of economic development for City X and I need to get this thing done in 3 years, I can't count on that. So I'm going to throw $100,000 in an organization and try and recruit the heck out of stuff.
And that's what we've done. So unless we redefine that, so the challenge is with collaborative culture, I think we need to redefine what the wins are. So, all right. Oh, we lost Hassan.
Lost Hassan,
Okay.
and Dia's got a comment. Do we want to talk about, like, because we thought about, like, a little bit on the onboarding side of things. Do we want to talk a little on that, or
Yes.
where's the best use of our time?
Okay. So I think that we've talked about collaborative culture to the extent that we can. So I can stop the recording and then we can share this out with people, and then maybe they'll be frustrated because we didn't come up with anything, except that now we know. I think we all see it in different ways, right? So it's like walking into the room at ESHIP. You can sense it. It's different. You recognize that the people that are there are different than other people, and they're not all the same, but there's some, I don't know, you find your people and you recognize that those are them. So that's really interesting.
There's definitely a common ground.
Right? So I love that. That's good, because then you don't feel like you're alone, and you have other people to talk to when you get frustrated and challenged and help sort this out. So on onboarding. So I'm going to stop the recording. We will wrap this up, and then we'll talk for like 5 minutes on the onboarding stuff, and then we'll let Dia go and the rest of us get on with our day. So let's do that. Okay.